Okay, welcome everyone to our Board Relations and Capital Projects webinar featuring Alexandra Badzak, the Director and CEO of the Ottawa Art Gallery. There are just a few housekeeping items to cover before we get started. Firstly, we will be recording this session and we will be emailing out a quick survey following the webinar along with the recording, which you're welcome to share with staff or colleagues. We ask that you complete the survey so that we can continue to improve our learning series for arts organizations and creative spaces. You can hear us, but we can't hear you. Your microphones have been disabled for this webinar, but you can use your speakers or headphones to listen in. You can adjust the sound by clicking on the speaker icon at the top of the meeting. Lastly, we will have about 15 minutes at the end to answer questions. So please type your question in the chat box and we'll get to as many as possible at the end. So to start off with some brief introductions, my name is Ailey Fisher and I'm the Programs and Communications Coordinator at ArtsBuild Ontario. In case you haven't heard of ArtsBuild, we are a nonprofit art service organization that provides tools, resources, and learning opportunities that help make Ontario's arts facilities more sustainable. Today we're going to be hearing from Alexandra Badzak, the Director and CEO of the Ottawa Arts Gallery, on the topic of board relations and capital projects. Alexandra has been leading the charge on a major gallery expansion for the Ottawa Art Gallery in the city's downtown core. Prior to joining the Ottawa Art Gallery as director, Alexandra worked for 10 years at the Mendel Art Gallery. She holds a bachelor's degree of fine arts and a master's of adult and continuing education with a focus on informal learning in a gallery context. More recently, during her tenure as the Diefenbunker Canada's Cold War Museum's first executive director, the Diefenbunker significantly increased self-generated and grant revenue, launched a series of bilingual programs, and developed a following through social media. She's currently a member of CAMDO, the Canadian Art Museums Directors Organization, and was one of 13 members of the Arts and Heritage Steering Committee charged with renewing the City of Ottawa's 2020 Cultural Plan. She's also an adjunct professor at the University of Ottawa. So now I will turn things over to Alexandra to get started with her presentation on board.
Thanks, Ailey. Welcome, everybody. I hope you can hear me. That's me in that picture there. Yet one more capital campaign announcement as part of the project that I'm undergoing right now. But as mentioned, I've worked in the cultural sector for about 20 years, and 10 of those years has been as director. And I will say I'm probably one of those weird, unique beasts that have about 3 cultural infrastructure projects as part of my experience within the cultural sector. So certainly when I was working at the Mendel Art Gallery, we went through a feasibility study on an expansion, and I was part of the functional design planning around that. Then when at the Diefenbunker, I took the museum through a fire retrofit expansion that brought capacity within that site up significantly. And then what I'm involved in right now is the OAG expansion. And so I'm going to use that as an example, as a case study for a lot of what I'm going to speak to today. I will say, though, that you're going to hear me use a lot of emphatic language, like you must do this or you should do this. But please note that this is my experience and that there isn't a one-stop shop for all of this. There's not one way of doing things. I think you really do need to pay attention to your context. But I hope you can glean some important advice through my experience. So in the case of the Ottawa Art Gallery expansion, we really were addressing a whole bunch of deficiencies. We really had no front door or street profile within the county courthouse that we were in, which we were one of 25 other arts organizations within that building. It was certainly not designed as an art gallery. There was no dedicated loading dock. We had retrofitted exhibition and collection storage spaces out of old, rooms for judges and jail cells. We had absolutely no public programming space or visitor amenity space. And in fact, we were one of the smallest municipal art galleries in Canada. And when you think of Ottawa's size, we're about the fourth largest city in Canada. That was something that really needed to be rectified. And of course, our context is very specific. We are in the seat of government in Canada. There is about 8 other national museums in town along with us. So that really shaped, I think, the history and, of course, the context of the Ottawa Art Gallery. So the OAG expansion for us is a dream come true. It's a wish fulfillment for our arts community. We are growing 5 times the size that we were before. It's a brand new purpose-built space. It is project managed by the City of Ottawa, so we're working very closely with them. And we're going to be opening in late fall of this year. It is a urban revitalization process. That was very much the way that it was framed, and it is a P3 design build project. So there's a lot of other stakeholders involved. As you can see through this image, there is the Germain Hotel group that's going to be doing a boutique hotel as part of our build, and then there's going to be condos on top of that. But what we can't see so well in that image is that our contemporary structure butts right up to the old Arts Court building that I showed you in that first slide. And so we're actually going to make Arts Court accessible on 4 different levels. So, a very exciting time, really a game changer in so many ways for the art gallery and the arts community in Ottawa. And I'm just going to advance the slide here. Just to give you a sense of the overall structure, because I think when you're going into a big capital build, there is an architecture as to who is leading things and whose voices are heard. And as you can see, this is quite a complicated structure. The city is leading it. We have a consortium, which includes the general contractor as well as the condo and hotel coming in as the consortium. And then you can see the key stakeholders are the Ottawa Art Gallery with the new build. We also have the University of Ottawa as part of the new build. And then Arts Court is a renovation. So overall, it's a $100,000 or $100 million project. Our portion, along with Arts Court, is close to $40 million. So here's where we start talking about capital builds and your board. I think I can say that it is a new reality when you take on a capital project. I'm assuming a lot of the people on the call right now are leaders of their organizations. I'll make that assumption pretty much throughout this whole presentation. So I will say directly to you, be prepared for the demands of a capital build. It is truly 4 jobs in one. You certainly have the oversight of ongoing operations, because although you may have a dark period or period where you're not actually programming, majority of the time leading up to your capital project, you will be programming as usual. You will certainly have the oversight of the building project itself. You may not be the key project manager on it, but you can never lose sight of all the details in the planning and execution and construction of the capital project. You will also most likely be doing a major fundraiser as well. And as leader of your organization, you're going to have to be the face of that fundraising effort. And of course, you're then also projecting into the future for operations. So you're building up that 5-year business plan that's going to take you through the build and into the first at least 2 years of operation. And so as much as you as leader of your organization needs to understand how intense it's going to be for you, your board of directors need to understand that as well. There are going to be a lot of demands on them, and they do need to be 100% committed to the process. They really should be coming on board because they want to be a part of it. I have put in this slide just so you can see the amount of time it usually takes for a capital project to see itself move forward. I think the OAG's expansion timeline is actually quite typical. As you can see, we did our feasibility study in 2004, and we're going to open in 2017, so more than 10 years. Of course, from really 2011 on, that's when the intensified work occurred. There is no question about that. But just to give you a sense that when you have a board working on a project like this, and even for yourself as a leader of the organization, understand that you have to be in it for the long run. And although there might be board changes based on whatever your bylaws are for how long board members can stay, it's not a bad idea to try to achieve some continuity within the leadership circle. So whether it's perhaps a bylaw amendment that allows your chair to stay on a little longer, having that sort of, as I said, continuity of leadership through a construction or a capital project, I think is quite important. So I'm going to cover off this topic right off the board, whether you have a working board or a governing board. Boards are both. They are both working. You just do different type of work. And of course, they always have to have oversight or governance. So I really do think that all boards are working, all boards are governance boards. It really just depends on the scale and perhaps the point of development of your organization. So, you know, a smaller organization may have board members who are leading some programs or doing marketing work for them. And a mid-size or larger organization has board members who are working on a capital campaign. You know, that's all work. And so I think most of what I'm going to say applies to any organization of really any size. The one thing that I will say when working with a board through a capital campaign project or through a capital project is that you're typically dealing with people who have high expectations, that are A-type personalities. And they're going to want to see success quite soon. Now, of course, as I mentioned, a capital project takes time. So as leader of your organization, you may want to consider finding a way to prove your worth and build confidence quickly. And my suggestion, and one that worked quite well for me, is to perhaps undertake a rebranding of your organization. This is an effort that you and your staff can primarily control. It allows you to exemplify and renew your vision. It helps to build profile for the organization during a critical time. And it helps to just put a really professional face forward. So I do think these small successes that you can manage when you're dealing with a long-term, large capital project is important. It's important for your relationship with the board. Know thyself, organizational history. I bring this up, and this is something I hadn't heard. It really came from experience, and so I'm sharing it with you. I think it's very important as you're going through a big capital project to really understand your organization's history, how it was formed, what its origins were. This deep knowledge, I can tell you, will help you make big decisions all along the way. And I'm just going to, of course, emphasize this idea that one solution doesn't fit all. You know, is your organization emerging from a grassroots artists movement? Or was it the result of a major donor who came forward with a capital gift, you know, a gift of cash and artwork? Is your capital build a radical departure from those origins, or is it really just a step forward? Is it a natural progression? I think understanding that is really key. An example of how this became important for us is through the capital campaign. We had a donor who came forward with both a cash donation as well as an artwork donation. And it was an artwork really made up of artifacts, ethnographic artifacts. And we really debated whether we could take that collection of artifacts. And when we went back deep down into the origins of the Ottawa Art Gallery's history, we realized, no, we merged as an artist movement. We were the place for the artists of Ottawa to finally showcase their talent. And we weren't in a situation like a lot of other art galleries in Canada. Weren't born through a major patron and typically a pan-Canadian and ethnographic collection. That wasn't our origin. So it made it easier for us, once we understood our origin, to say no to that gift of artifacts. But I will say that we did take his cash donation. So in the long run, it worked out. My other point on this slide is it is important to compare yourself to other like institutions. Certainly the Ottawa Art Gallery used it as a key point when making a case for support for our growth by indicating we were one of the smallest municipal art galleries in Canada. But I will also say that it is sometimes a trap because context, your own unique context, is truly important when you're doing a capital build. Understand it. And don't compare yourself to organizations if it just doesn't make sense to, because you might be growing too big or perhaps too small based on the comparisons to other organizations. So one of the key building blocks for success in our experience, certainly, and I would suggest this is really across the board, is to get a feasibility study going. Having that external document that illustrates broad experience to the project, I think is really, really important. It can't just be you or your board saying, this is what we need. You do need that external document of others, other experts or consultants helping you to say and articulate the need. And I would say that the feasibility study should include a deep connection with your community stakeholders, so that, in fact, you can say that the community had been consulted, that they are behind your project, and needing to pull upon that from time to time as you're moving forward, as you're seeking support from certainly government funders, becomes, I think, quite important. There is often a lag time, and as you saw from the timeline I showed you earlier, between when you might commission a feasibility study and when you might move into actual design work. And my suggestion would be to take that time to keep going back to your community and test drive your concepts for design. In the case of the Ottawa Art Gallery, our feasibility study was done in 2004. I came on board as the leader of the organization in 2010, and I immediately created a consultation with our community again to look at what was said within the feasibility study and see if it still resonated within the community. And we took back that information that we got from that further consultation in 2010, and we went back again in 2012 and just refined the questions that we asked our community. And when I say community, for us it was really looking at our artist community, as our cultural leaders community, as well as our donors. So we kept test driving and refining the feasibility study. It didn't just sit as a document on a shelf. I'm a big believer in strategic priorities. I think they're fundamental as ways and means of illustrating the efforts and the focus of a cultural organization. And so I do think that it's a really key aspect to working with your board is having them be involved in the strategic planning. And you really do need your strategic priorities to represent a commitment to growth, because this is the way you are externalizing that message out to your various stakeholders, including your government funders. I think the strat planning process really allows you as director to clearly know how to direct the resources and what that path ahead looks like. And my suggestion for strategic priorities would be to make them short-term, direct, attainable, but ambitious. You do want to show that you're moving the organization forward, but you're doing it in a way that is sustainable. And as I mentioned before, I do think it's very important that your board is participating broadly within that strategic planning process. You want their buy-in. Although the board chair doesn't necessarily have to lead the process, your board chair is such a key stakeholder in a capital project, and you do need that person to be in concert with you in leadership of that project. I often find the strategic planning process a good role for a vice chair or a secretary to lead. Oops. So this is an example of the Ottawa Art Gallery's strategic priorities as I came on board first with the project in 2011 to 2013. So attract broad and diverse communities to the gallery. I mean, that should be an ongoing sort of thing, but we wanted to state a real commitment to doing that. Maximizing the Ottawa Art Gallery's visibility. I've italicized that because I think that was one of the key parts of leading into a capital project. We needed to push ourselves out there. Our community needed to know about us a bit more, and so that was very important. That's why I also felt that a branding process at that stage made a lot of sense. Strengthen ties and links with the arts community. Of course, that's an ongoing, very important priority. But the last two priorities, secure a more appropriate facility and build and strengthen the gallery's connection to the city, were two key parts, obviously, for us moving ahead with the capital project. So, talking about your board composition. I think it's very important that your board understands that they do have a true oversight role, but they'll probably need a new skill set when moving on a capital project. The expertise will change as you go along through the process. But I think it's a very important idea to develop a bit of a skills matrix and perhaps a succession plan for your board. And that can be done through your executive or your governance committee or between you and your board chair. Typically, in a capital project, you need expertise on the board that covers the roles of architecture, project management, legal is very important, and I would specify somebody with expertise in agreements. Legal agreements could be very, very helpful. Change consultant, I think, is also a key point. You're moving your organization, everybody, through change, and I think having some expertise on the board of that nature is very helpful. And then, of course, a key part of board oversight will be looking at the risk, and specifically the risk involved in your finances. So bringing somebody with that expertise is also important. And then I think everybody understands that fundraising is going to be a key role for the board during a capital project. Oops, keep advancing it too quickly, sorry. There we go. So obviously, when you're going through a capital build, you're not doing this by yourself. You very much need to build up key stakeholders. In our case, it was a municipal government. We're a municipal art gallery, although have an arm's length relationship with our municipality. But we needed our municipal government, more specifically our mayor. You can see Mayor Watson right beside myself and our board chair, Lawson Hunter, as well as some councillors. You really need them to champion the project. And that, as you saw by our strategic priorities, really does need to be a priority for your board and for yourself. I will stress, and I think it's very important, that as a leader of your organization, you shouldn't do all of this work yourself. You do really want to share that responsibility with your board. So don't concentrate all the power in your hands. You want to share that because municipal stakeholders or, university alumni stakeholders, whoever your key stakeholders may be, they want to know that you've got broad community support behind your project. And that is what the board represents. So I can't stress how important having a good business plan is. I know it could seem like an an intimidating process, depending on the size of your organization. But within that 5-year business plan for a capital project, it's where you really articulate your case for support, why you're doing this, what are your needs, and you can build that into the plan. It's also the place where you can start to excite the imagination. But again, I think it's so important that you make it attainable, a sustainable plan. The plan should reflect all aspects of programs and operations. So don't just stick to talking about all the great, exhibitions that you might do, and in the case of an art gallery, but talk about how you're growing staff. Represent what the energy costs might be for running a larger organization. Don't forget any of those aspects of your operation. I think far too often that's where art galleries or cultural institutions run into problems, is that they haven't articulated the growth in all aspects of programs and operations. I think it's a key, whether you're developing the business plan as leader of your organization, or you're workshopping that out or farming that out to a consultant. Please ensure that your board ratifies the business plan, but understands that it's a working document. You're not just doing it and putting it on the shelf. You're coming back to it, you're test driving it, you're constantly refining it as the economy changes, as the cost of living changes. You want to make sure that you're tweaking your projections so that they remain relevant. I will say that the business plan is something that donors and funders wanted to see quite often. They want to see that you've done your homework, that you're not just asking for money and you haven't articulated how you're achieving sustainable operations. So I do think it's a fundamental piece for a capital project, and I do think your board really needs to have a buy-in into it. This is a slide that I did want to put in. I think it's very important for cultural organizations not to overpromise when they're going into a capital project. You don't want to provide a hollow vision that can't succeed, because your success or failures will in fact affect your entire sector, and to some degree your region, in terms of donor and funder confidence. You really have to understand what your fundraising environment is and what its capacity is. So in the case of the Ottawa Art Gallery, as I mentioned, we're in the midst of 8 other national museums. I think we've got the headquarters for probably every not-for-profit in the country, and we have no headquarters for corporations. So we're in a very complex fundraising environment, and our fundraising goal represented that. It was very modest, and we made sure that it was something that we could achieve. And I will say, though, we were coming out of the gate at a time when another cultural organization failed within Ottawa. And in fact, we had the closure of a couple of organizations. The organizations themselves went under. And that did not help us in any way. So this is what I'm saying, your success or failures affect the sector. We had to fight against the failures of other cultural organizations in Ottawa. We had to really prove not only the Ottawa Art Gallery's ability to move forward, but that the sector, the cultural sector, could be trusted. A big piece of moving forward with your board is managing the fear of the unknown. You are leaders of your organizations. You're going to be surrounded by a lot of highfalutin people, as I mentioned, A-type personalities who like to be in control and have all the answers, but you're just not going to be in the situation of having all the answers, either yourself or your board. Say it one more time, one solution does not fit all. So one organization, you might look to the example of another, in our case, gallery. Well, what they do might not work for you. Capital projects, although you plan for them, absolutely, they are iterative. And one of the key skills required is an ability to do good problem solving. But I think this is one of those aspects when you're leading a capital project that not a lot of people have spoken to. Certainly when I was starting off on the capital project with the Ottawa Art Gallery, I felt this, and you know, a lot of the books I was reading and the articles I was reading or the people I was talking to, nobody really admitted how big a part of your job as leader was around managing fears, and that's why I wanted to talk about it. I think everybody should understand that that's an important part. And certainly that was one of the reasons I wanted to do this presentation today. This is a tool, it's the change territory map, as we call it, that I found very useful in managing fear of your organization. Now, it's a bit of a messy slide there. You can't read it so well, so I'm going to pull out some pieces. But you know, in the early stages of the capital project, my board would ask me a lot of questions like, well, did you think about this? You know, how are we going to do this? And of course, you have thought about it, but it's perhaps not the right time to get into the detail of it yet, or it's toggled to other things that need to be resolved before you can get into that particular topic. And so instead of just keeping that all on your shoulders or in your mind, we worked with a consultant to develop this change territory map, which allowed the board to just put out all those questions. So how are we going to run a cafe? Are we going to have a cafe? How are we going to deal with the grand opening? You know, volunteerism, what are we going to do about that? All important things, but maybe just not the most relevant at the moment. So we got it all out there, and we charted it on this map of degree of certainty, uncertainty, timeline, as well as you can see these sort of realms of fiduciary, strategic, and generative. So I'm going to take a moment to speak to that. The Ottawa Art Gallery board went through a bit of a governance review, I would say, throughout this period, and we really looked at how we were functioning. So most boards function on very well on the fiduciary level, which is, you know, you're rubber stamping, you're making sure that the finances are running, you make sure that your policies are in place, that sort of thing. And then, you know, a lot of cultural organizations feel quite comfortable with the strategic level, again, the strategic priority setting, making sure you have plans in place. But a lot of cultural organizations and their boards sort of stop there. And we were very interested in the notion of generative governance, which is moving beyond the fiduciary strategic into a place where you're asking value-centered questions of your organization. So one of the points on the change territory map is how are we approaching the cafe? So when you're looking at that question from a generative perspective, the first you're asking yourself, well, do we need a cafe? Does that strengthen the OAG's experience? Does it take away from the OAG's experience? Do our stakeholders or community want that? And so we answered ourselves quite quickly on that, in the sense that it came forward through all the stakeholder consultation that yes, a cafe was going to be a very important part of the new OEG's experience. And so having answered that generative question, we then moved it to the strategic level, which was, okay, we don't know how to run a cafe, so let's bring in a consultant. Let's have a series of stakeholder consultations with caterers and restaurateurs in Ottawa so we understand it a little better. And that eventually led us to putting out a request for proposals for a third-party operator to run our cafe. And during that period, we sort of came up with then the vision for that cafe. And now I would say the cafe concept is moved into the fiduciary level, where we're in fact working through a legal agreement with that third-party operator. So that's just one little tool, I think, to help on managing all those questions and fears that your board might have. Another way of handling, board fear during a capital campaign is to look at the notion of incremental growth. And I found this particularly helpful on the latter half of the capital project, sort of where I was about a year ago, where you're starting to shape in much more detail the budget of your inaugural year. And so I worked very hard with my finance manager and the treasurer of the board to take all of that big growth, both on the expenditure level and on the revenue level, and break it into bite-sized pieces so that the board could have a sense of confidence and to truly understand each aspect of growth within the organization. So as you can see by this slide, we took them through the exhibition expenditure growth that was going to occur. And what we used was this concept of baseline, or what the Ottawa Art Gallery was comfortable with managing in the past. So, we were a mid-sized organization. We were comfortable with about a $1.3 million budget. Typically for exhibitions, we would spend about 130K. And so we took that as the baseline and then looked at the incremental growth on top of that. And so that's what you're sort of seeing. We're making the case for support that, existing exhibition spaces were this much, we're expanding to this. If you use that as a calculation, a growth of 200K incremental costs annually for exhibitions is quite logical. And so we worked quite hard on test driving these slides before we presented it to the full board. We actually test drove it through the executive committee of the board to just glean what might be some of the questions or concerns or what might not they understand about this. So we had a whole another slide deck prepared to answer all of those questions that we were hearing, so that again, we felt very prepared in bringing this to the board. But that the board could also, dig down and really challenge us on all aspects of the organization. And we found that quite effective. Our treasurer took the board through this process and, in fact, at each stage got their approval. So again, it doesn't mean that just you're riding on all of this big change. You've got the full board understanding it and being behind your growth. And so we did the same thing around incremental revenues as well. We took our baseline and then we projected incremental growth on top of that. Moving right along, one aspect of your board is how much oversight can you achieve during this period of time. Of course, that's a very important role for your board. But I often find the situations either there's too much or too little oversight coming from the boards. Committees are obviously very effective means in dealing with oversight, so that you can grapple with a lot of details at the committee level and then allow that committee to bring forward recommendations or reports. So again, that they're owning, what it is that you're grappling with. I will say that I was worried moving forward that having too many committees required for the capital project was going to be a burden on myself. And so we looked at that and what was the best structure for our capital project, and decided that a lot of short-term working groups or ad hoc committees were probably going to be a lot more effective during this period of rapid growth and change. So an example of that is that we have an ad hoc OEG expansion committee, and that's made up of board chair, obviously, the treasurer, as well as those board members that came with experience in architecture, project management, etc. And we developed a term of reference. There were threshold spending amounts that were articulated within those terms of reference that allowed me and my staff to know, what discretionary decision making we had and what elements, what spending thresholds needed to come to the board for approval. And that was very, very helpful because, again, as leader of your organization, you don't want to really be stuck being the only one having known or being accountable to the decisions you're making on a capital project. You need your board oversight for this. They need to be responsible as well. And so, you need to find the mechanisms that allow you to do so. Another situation, working groups, the CAFE task force working group was a situation that, we needed to really just focus in on that one little piece, but we certainly didn't need a full committee dedicated to it. So it was just a really short-term group made up of board and staff working on equal terms to try to get us to the stage that, in fact, we are right now, where we're about to sign a lease agreement with a third-party operator. So just a little bit about that. I think that's an important part that not a lot of organizations think about until they're well into it. So I hope this advice is helpful. So the home stretch, this is the stage that I'm in right now, I will say, and I can say that it is the hardest stage. Little is in your control because, of course, it's a construction project is well on its way. But you still have to be the face of the project and the organization. You're going to have people asking you, when is it ready? When is it ready? When are you opening? And you're not always going to be able to speak to that with full certainty. So you're managing, a lot of unknowns there. I will say at this stage, this is when all of that early documentation work that you did through those committees that I just spoke about will pay off. Because those decisions that you've made that are minuted and articulated will come back at you at this final stage when budgets are getting tight, when there might emerge legal discrepancies, that sort of thing, when dealing with the general contractor. This is a time when you're going to see a lot of fatigue and stress come in. Both between you and your board, but certainly within the construction team as well, and your staff. So, I would say that the emotional quotient at this stage is very important. You have to be mindful of the stress levels that you're seeing within your organization. You have to be generous with people, allow them the time off that they need, but you're going to have to keep things moving forward. So, I think that your focus has to be so sharp at this stage. One point of advice I will say is for yourself as leader of your organization, give yourself time off as well. Don't just, barrel through this, without any respite, without finding your personal happy place, because you're going to be no help to anybody if you can't hold it together through the entire project. So really do manage yourself and your own health, both emotionally and physically, during a project like this. And my final slide looks at giving thanks. So I'm about to move into this stage, and I think it's so critical after you've gone through all of this stress that's just going to keep ramping up in that final stage, that you take the time to give credit and thanks to everybody who's involved. And so I recently was at a conference where I was discussing this stage with Lynn Olette from the Quebec Fine Arts Museum. And, her example was that she brought in her staff and their spouses, the construction workers and their spouses, the architects and their spouses, all the board members and their spouses, and she did a soft celebration or opening with them of her new building. And I thought that was just so lovely. You have a sense that everybody owns it, has bought into it, is proud of the project, but you also, on a sort of sneaky way, get to test drive your organization with a group of sort of more internal stakeholders before you actually put it out there to the masses or to your VIPs. And allows you to just tweak things a little bit before you have your grand opening. So I think it's a really clever thing to do. I know that Shirley Thompson, when she opened the National Gallery of Canada, did something very similar. So I'm definitely going to take that little bit and make it happen for my grand opening, or the grand opening for the Ottawa Art Gallery. I think this is a key time to bless and release board and committee members. Again, these are volunteers. And I think you do need to allow them to walk away from your organization. Hopefully they remain key and committed stakeholders, but they do need their time off too. As I mentioned, there's going to be conflicts throughout all stages of a capital build, but this is the moment to kind of forget about that and be generous and recognize everyone's effort, so that in the long run, you have deep and broad ownership over the cultural project that you're building. And I think I'll really end on that note because I want to have some time for questions. But this idea of a capital project for culture, for the cultural sector is really an honor. That's truly how I see it. I'm thrilled to be part of something like this. And when you're in the midst of it and you're feeling perhaps overwhelmed or fatigued, I think that's the one aspect that has certainly kept me going, is that idea that you're building this thing in perpetuity in most cases. It's an important legacy piece for your community. It's an important asset for your community, and being a part of that is really something that you can take pride in at all stages of your capital build. And of course, you want that pride shared between your staff and your board as well. So I think I'll end on that stage, and really excited to answer questions.
That's great. Thank you so much, Alexandra, for putting together that wonderful presentation. Lots to think about. So now we have time for some questions. So please, if you have a question, type it in the chat box, and we will get to as many as we can within the next 10 minutes or so. So I see a few people are typing already, so let's just see. And
perhaps while we're waiting for some questions, I will say that I think I skipped over my last slide, which was just to say that obviously, as you're going through your capital build, you're also building for your sustainable operations. The inaugural opening is just the beginning. I said it before around the business plan, but you do want to be test driving and updating those business assumptions as you're going forward. And it's a good time to consider leadership change on the board. In our case, we had a board chair who was really great at fundraising, but he's going to step away. And so we went through a succession planning. So in 2018, when the gallery is open and leading, our new reality, we've brought forward the former treasurer to be the new board chair. And for us, that's hopefully sends a signal out to our major stakeholders that we understand how important the first 2 years of sustainable operations are, and that we've got the right leadership and oversight for that period. And then my final point is, don't build your policies and procedures until you've really got the experience of being in the new build, so that you understand the rhythm and flow of your new space.
That's great. We had a few questions come out. Roxanne, yes, we will be sharing a PDF file of the PowerPoint. And the recording does come with the screen capability, so you will be able to watch it as well. Linda O'Donnell has a question. Alex, do you have a capital donor recognition policy?
Yes, I do. Now, I gleaned over the whole fundraising aspect of it, just because I feel like that's a whole nother presentation in its own. Happy to speak to anybody on this call about the fundraising aspects. In the art galleries, in the Ottawa Art Gallery's case, we decided not to use an external company because we felt that managing donor relations is a long-term commitment, and we wanted to build capacity within our staff for that. But I will say that we did hire a fundraising coach to help guide us on really pacing out the campaign, building the case for support, as well as providing all that kind of policy and documents that we needed for the capital campaign. Happy to share all of that with you.
That's great. If we have any other questions, please go ahead and type them in the chat box. We'll wait 30 seconds or so to see if we can get some typing going.
Perhaps as we're waiting for more questions to come in, I will say that in a capital campaign mode for a capital project, I think a lot of leaders think that they're the ones that have to run the show, and you certainly are the face of the organization, But your board and your capital campaign committees really should be doing that peer-to-peer ask. It really wants to come from them. So if I could articulate an ideal, donor setting, it would be that, say, your board chair or your campaign chair has opened the door to a meeting with a donor. They've come into that meeting with you. They begin the conversation by saying why they're so excited about this project, what they themselves have committed to the project, and then sort of build you up as a leader, saying how exceptional you are and how excited they are for your vision for your cultural institution. That then gives you the ability to be the visionary, to deliver that vision piece. And then, what's ideal is to then have the chair or your one of your capital campaign committee members then really push the ask, see what they are willing to give. And then once that stage is over, you start to manage that relationship. So you can identify if there's a naming opportunity there. And your development officer helps to manage really the back end of things. So have you made all the right touch points with the donor, just from a documentation level on their pledges when they're coming in? But also, you don't want your donor just to be hearing from you when you're asking for their next pledge to come in. You want to be touching base with them on a very regular basis. And that's really the role of the development officer within your organization.
That's great. Well, I think on that note, we'll wrap up questions. If a question does come to you afterwards, or maybe when you're rewatching the session, please feel free to send it to us. You'll have my contact information, and we'll be able to pass that along to Alexandra. So just a reminder, we will be sending you a link to the recording of today's webinar as well as the survey. Please complete the survey. It's so appreciated on our end because it really does help us improve the learning series experience for you. We will be introducing new topics and dates for our upcoming learning series webinars later this summer. So please stay tuned for more updates on that. Again, a huge thank you to Alexandra for presenting today, and we'd also like to extend thanks to our funders, the Ontario Trillium Foundation, the Ontario Arts Council, and the Department of Canadian Heritage for their support of the Learning Series and making this possible. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I hope you have a great day and enjoy the long Canada Day weekend.